The neon sign buzzed weakly in the desert wind, its faded letters spelling Sunrise Motel through a haze of sand and sunlight. I stood in the parking lot with the key in my hand, the metal warm from the Arizona heat, the paint on the office door flaking like the pages of an old story no one cared to read. The air smelled of dust gasoline and memory. Somewhere in that dry silence, I could still hear my mother's voice whispering, "Someday, this place will mean something again." Grace. She'd said it while hooked up to hospital tubes, her eyes brighter than the machines beside her. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Yesterday, the lawyer read her will. Today, the laughter still echoed. My Uncle Frank threw his head back. First, his gold watch flashing under the fluorescent lights of the conference room. The motel, he barked. "She left you that dump." Aunt Ellen's perfume clouded the air as she fanned herself with a property brochure. Margaret must have been sentimental to the end. She sighed, pretending pity. My cousin Savannah filmed a reaction clip for her followers, whispering, "Guys, it's like Psycho but sadder." I sat there gripping the paper numb. The lawyer cleared his throat. "To my daughter, Grace Miller, I leave full ownership of the Sunrise Motel, including land fixtures and archives." He went on reading assets for the rest of them shares savings jewelry. I heard none of it. Frank's laughter filled the gaps. "Guess the teacher gets a field trip," he muttered. They all signed their acceptance forms like they were stamping a joke into permanence. When I walked out, Savannah called after me. "Hey, Grace, maybe turn it into a haunted attraction. That's the only way it'll make money." Their laughter trailed me into the parking garage, bouncing off concrete walls. I drove back to my small apartment, the will trembling on the passenger seat. All night I stared at it under the kitchen light. My mother, Margaret Miller, had run that motel alone for 30 years after Dad left. It was never glamorous, just 6 rooms, a flickering sign, and a steady stream of tired travelers who called her Maggie. I spent my childhood folding sheets, refilling vending machines, doing homework behind the counter. I'd sworn I would leave that life, and I did college, a teaching job in Tucson, a quiet divorce, a small mortgage. And yet in her final moment, Mom gave me the one thing I thought I'd escaped. At sunrise, I packed my car. The highway shimmered like liquid glass as I headed east. The closer I got to the motel, the heavier the air felt, thick with sage and nostalgia. When I turned onto the dirt driveway, the past rushed forward. The lobby window was cracked, the Coke machine gutted for parts tumbleweeds lodged against the stairs. I unlocked the office door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, dust and coffee grounds and faint lemon cleaner, like time sealed in a jar. Her handwriting was still on the wall calendar. Order linens, pay tax, Grace's birthday. I touched the counter where she once counted change for truckers and tourists. For a second, I wanted to call her to ask why she'd given me this ruin instead of the jewelry or the house she sold years ago. Then I noticed a thin layer of new dust on everything except the keyring. It gleamed polished. Someone had cleaned it recently. My mother had planned this. That realization tightened my chest more than grief. She'd left me a puzzle, and I could almost hear her voice again teasing, "You always loved fixing things, sweetheart. Start here." Outside, the neon flickered once as if agreeing. The wind kicked up, tossing sand against the windows. I stood behind the counter, gripping the keys, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. It was small, sharp, and steady, like a match catching in the dark. They had laughed at what she left me, but deep down, I sensed it wasn't a joke. My mother had been many things, but she was never foolish. I whispered into the empty lobby. "All right, Mom, let's see what you saw." The lawyer's office still smelled like stale coffee and printer toner when I walked in that afternoon, summoned for the official signing of inheritance papers. My relatives had already arrived, clustered near the polished oak table like guests at a victory feast. Uncle Frank, tall and broad, with a permanent tan and a belly earned from too many business lunches, leaned back in his chair with smug ease. Aunt Ellen perched beside him in her pastel blazer, tapping her manicured nails on her phone. Savannah, her influencer daughter, sat in the corner snapping filtered selfies with the caption, "Family Drama Part 2." The lawyer, an older man named Mr. Redford, cleared his throat. "All right, everyone, let's make this quick. Mrs. Margaret Miller's will is clear and binding." His voice carried a weight none of them respected. To my daughter, Grace Miller, he read, I leave full ownership of the Sunrise Motel located on Route 89 in Cochise County, including land building and records. I heard the shuffle of silk sleeves and a stifled laugh. Frank spoke first. The motel, oh, Margaret really did lose it toward the end. Ellen gave a pitying smile. Maybe Grace can use it for one of her school projects. Their laughter was low and poisonous. Mr. Redford continued unbothered. To my siblings, Frank and Ellen Miller, I leave the remainder of my liquid assets to be divided equally. He looked up. Total value of $123,000. Frank's smirk faltered for half a second, then returned. Well, he said we'll make do. Ellen crossed her arms. That motel's worthless, Grace. It hasn't been on any tourist map since the 90s. Savannah chimed in without looking up from her phone. Maybe turn it into a horror Airbnb. #rustic trauma. Their words stung, but I kept my tone calm. I'm not selling. Frank laughed. Oh, you will. You always wanted out of this town. Consider this your last chance. He leaned closer, the faint scent of whiskey and arrogance heavy between us. You're a teacher, Grace. You can't even afford new tires for that car of yours. Let us handle it. We'll pay you a fair price, $40,000 cash. That place is a liability. I folded the will carefully and slipped it into my bag. No, I said, meeting his gaze. Mom trusted me with it. I'll see what she wanted me to do. Ellen rolled her eyes. Sentimental nonsense. Margaret never knew business. Mr. Redford interrupted. Mrs. Miller was clear in her wording. The motel and all related property belongs solely to her daughter. His tone sharpened, silencing even Savannah's tapping thumbs. Frank muttered under his breath, We'll see about that. As they left, Ellen turned to me with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll regret turning down our offer. That land is more trouble than it's worth. Savannah snickered. See you on TikTok, cousin. Maybe I'll feature your haunted motel in my next video. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving a heavy stillness. Mr. Redford handed me a small envelope. Your mother asked me to give you this privately. She said you'd understand when you returned to the property. Inside was a single key brass and old tagged with a hand-etched number, Room 6. My pulse quickened. Was there a letter, I asked? He shook his head. Just the key. I thanked him and stepped out into the Arizona heat. The air shimmered over the parking lot, the sun so bright it bleached the world. I stood by my car, staring at that key. Mom had chosen Room 6 for a reason. It was the last room she'd cleaned before the cancer took her strength, the one she'd locked herself after crying over unpaid bills. Maybe she wanted me to see something she couldn't explain. Maybe she wanted me to finish what she started. I drove away with the air conditioner blasting, but no amount of cold could cut through the weight of what I felt. They laughed because they only saw dust and decay. They'd never looked close enough to see the story underneath. I whispered to the empty road. You were wrong, all of you. This isn't over. The desert road stretched endless and cracked before me, curling toward the mountains like a ribbon left too long in the sun. Each mile closer to the motel pressed heavier on my chest. When I reached the familiar turnoff, the sign for Route 89 leaned sideways, bullet holes dotting its face like freckles of time. The Sunrise Motel sat at the end of a gravel lane, its once blue walls faded to the color of ash. I parked beside the empty office and stepped out into the heat. The air shimmered with the sound of cicadas. My mother's ghost seemed to linger in every shadow. I pushed open the office door. The bell above it gave a weak jingle like a memory trying to breathe. Inside, the same counter stood where she used to greet travelers, her handwriting still faint on a corkboard of yellowed notes, room rates, grocery lists, reminders. A photograph of her younger self in front of the motel hung crooked on the wall, sun-bleached but smiling. I touched the frame and whispered, I'm home, Mom. Dust swirled in the sunlight, tiny ghosts dancing. In that stillness, memories unfurled me at 10 years old, wiping tables while she balanced the books. Her laughter when a guest forgot their room key. The hum of the vending machine at midnight when she slipped me sodas after long homework nights. Those sounds were gone, replaced by silence thick enough to drown in. I wandered into the back room where she kept her office, a cramped space filled with receipts and invoices stacked in boxes. On the desk sat an old mug with the slogan, "One day at a time." The lipstick print on its rim hadn't faded. I sat in her chair, its leather cracked, and closed my eyes. I could almost feel her presence, calm and certain, the way she used to rest her hand on mine when I doubted everything. She'd built this place from nothing after Dad left. She'd scrubbed floors until midnight, kept the lights on through recessions, even hosted stranded travelers during monsoon storms. To the world, it was a dying roadside motel. To her, it was a promise, a space where no one had to feel alone. I looked around and saw not just decay, but fingerprints of devotion. Each scratch on the counter, a story, each faded curtain, a chapter. Still, the reality pressed in, peeling paint, unpaid taxes, a roof sagging with time. It needed money, permits, miracles. I thought of Frank's smirk, Ellen's polished disgust, Savannah's camera flash capturing my humiliation. Maybe they were right. Maybe this place really was worthless. But when I opened the file drawer, a slip of paper caught my eye. A note written in Mom's looping cursive. It read, "Grace, keep your eyes open. Not all treasure shines." I froze reading it twice. Her sense of timing was uncanny even from beyond. I stepped outside again. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, staining the motel in bronze light. For a heartbeat, it looked beautiful, like a relic waiting to wake up. Then a truck thundered past on the highway, scattering dust across the sign. The letters flickered half alive. I clenched the key to room 6, the one Mr. Redford had given me, until the edges bit into my palm. I walked toward the far end of the building. The corridor smelled of rust and rain. Door 6 resisted at first, then creaked open to a rush of stale air. Inside, the curtains were drawn, the bed stripped bare, but something metallic glinted on the nightstand, a small tin box sealed with electrical tape. My pulse quickened. I peeled back the tape and found inside a handful of receipts, an old Polaroid of Mom standing near the back fence, and a folded map drawn on motel stationery with a red X behind the property. The air seemed to shift around me, heavy with revelation. Outside, thunder rumbled low and distant, though the sky was clear. I smiled through a sting of tears. She hadn't left me a ruin. She'd left me a trail. I whispered, "I see it, Mom. I see what you meant." For the first time, hope flickered like the neon sign outside, weak but undeniable, promising that somewhere beneath all this dust, something extraordinary still lived. 2 days after I unlocked room 6, the motel's gravel lot filled with the crunch of tires. I looked out from behind the front desk window and saw Uncle Frank's silver Escalade slide to a stop, sunlight glinting off its chrome. Ellen stepped out of the passenger side, clutching a designer tote, followed by Savannah, already filming on her phone. My stomach tightened. They didn't drive 4 hours into the desert just to visit. Frank swaggered toward the door and pushed it open without knocking. "Grace," he boomed, his voice carrying the false warmth of a salesman. "We thought we'd come check on you, make sure you're not overwhelmed with all this responsibility." His eyes scanned the lobby, the peeling wallpaper, the dusty vending machine. "Still smells like diesel and dead dreams." Ellen placed a hand on his arm, pretending to scold him. "Now, Frank, don't be cruel. Grace knows we only want what's best for her." I wiped my palms on my jeans. "What's this really about?" Savannah panned her phone around the room. "My followers love retro stuff," she said. "This is like perfect for a before video. Can I show them the creepy hallways?" I shot her a glare that finally made her lower the camera. Frank dropped a manila envelope onto the counter. "Let's make this simple," he said. "We'll buy the motel from you. 40,000 cash. You can move back to Tucson and forget this dump ever existed." I opened the envelope. The contract inside already had my name typed on it. "That's generous." Ellen added, voice honey sweet. "It saves you the taxes, the headaches, the repairs. We can even add an extra 5,000 if you sign today." I stared at them. The memory of Mom coughing through long nights, keeping this place alive, burned behind my ribs. "I'm not selling," I said quietly. Frank's smile faded. "Don't be naive, Grace. This place isn't worth fixing. It'll cost more to demolish than it's worth." Ellen sighed dramatically. "Your mother let sentiment cloud her judgment. Don't make the same mistake." I folded the papers and slid them back across the counter. "She built this from nothing." "That's not a mistake," Savannah smirked. That's cute. Maybe you can write a children's book about it. Frank leaned closer. Listen to me. You think this is about pride? It's about money liability and the law. The longer you hold this property, the more it bleeds value. You'll drown in taxes before you ever turn a profit. My heart thudded, but I didn't flinch. I'm staying. His face hardened, and for a moment I saw something colder than greed resentment. Fine. But when this place collapses, don't come begging us for help. They turned to leave. Savannah filmed the cracked sign one last time and muttered, 40 grand wasted. Aunt Maggie really did lose it. When their car vanished down the highway, silence swallowed the motel again. I sat behind the counter shaking. The envelope still lay on the desk, its legal weight like a dare. Outside, the wind picked up rattling the glass door. I caught my reflection, tired, dusty, defiant. For a moment, I doubted myself. What if they were right? What if Mom's faith in this place was just stubborn nostalgia? Then I looked at the map I'd found in room 6, the red X drawn behind the property line. She'd hidden something back there, something they didn't know existed. A thought struck me. Maybe that was why they were pushing so hard, why Ellen looked nervous every time Mom's name came up. I opened the drawer under the register and found the motel's old flashlight. Its beam flickered weakly when I tested it, but it was enough. The sun had dipped low shadows crawling across the parking lot like ghosts. I stepped outside, dust stinging my eyes. Each step toward the back fence felt heavier, but the map guided me steady and sure. Beyond the last row of rooms lay a patch of overgrown weeds and sand, a place I hadn't seen since childhood. There, under the last rays of sunset, I saw a shape. Metal rusted, half buried. My heart pounded. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Either way, I wasn't selling until I knew the truth. I whispered into the wind. You were right, Mom. They'd sell the world for cash, but you left me something better. The next morning, the desert air hung still and dry, heavy with the smell of sage and old dust. I woke early, unable to shake the image of that rusted shape behind the motel. After coffee gone cold, I grabbed gloves, a small shovel, and the old flashlight and walked to the back lot. The morning sun burned gold across the sand. The area behind the motel had once been fenced, but now weeds and brittle tumbleweeds grew in wild tangles. The red X from Mom's hand-drawn map lined up exactly with the spot where the ground dipped slightly near the old storage shed. I knelt, brushed away dirt, and my glove hit something solid metal rectangular half buried. A few careful digs revealed a weathered toolbox, the kind Mom kept under the counter. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in wax paper. I unwrapped it carefully and found a single key and a folded piece of motel letterhead written in her familiar looping script. Grace checked the office drawer. The one that sticks. You'll find what matters there. My throat tightened. She'd hidden breadcrumbs like a game, knowing I'd follow. I hurried back inside, heart racing. The office was bright with morning light slanting through cracked blinds. I pulled open the desk drawers one by one, pins, invoices, faded postcards. The bottom left drawer resisted when I tugged. After a hard pull, it gave way with a groan, revealing a battered leather ledger. Its cover was scarred and soft from decades of handling. The first few pages were normal room rentals, maintenance costs, customer notes. Then I flipped toward the back and froze. The entries changed. Names I didn't recognize coded initials and red ink marks tiny circles beside some numbers. One entry read, SR, Project CDoc file. Another survey payment confirmed. Confidential. My pulse jumped. I dug deeper and found an envelope labeled 1978, Purchase Agreement. Inside was the original deed to the motel and a geological survey stamped by the State Energy Department. The notation underlined twice potential geothermal vein beneath parcel. I stared at it, stunned. Geothermal, heat beneath the ground. The word pulsed through me like thunder. Mom had known. She must have discovered it when she bought the place or years later, but she'd never told anyone. It explained so much: the nights she stayed up reading contracts, the times she refused Frank's early offers to buy her out. She hadn't been clinging to sentiment. She'd been protecting a secret. The flashlight rolled off the desk, clattering onto the floor, jolting me back to reality. I picked it up, shaking. Outside, a car slowed on the highway, then sped up again, leaving a ghost of dust behind. I looked down at the ledger at Mom's handwriting, looping around the words, "Don't trust them." My stomach sank. Them could only mean one thing, her siblings. I turned another page and found a letter tucked inside, dated 2 years before she died. To whomever finds this, she wrote, "The truth is in the details. They laughed at what they didn't understand. Don't let them bury it." My hands trembled as I folded the pages back. The motel wasn't a ruin. It was sitting on something priceless. But if Mom had known, why hadn't she claimed it? Why hide it instead of fighting for it? Unless someone had stopped her. I remembered Aunt Ellen's position on the city council, her endless talk of redevelopment permits. My pulse thudded in my ears. Maybe Mom had tried and Ellen blocked it. I grabbed my phone and took photos of everything: the survey, the ledger, the letter. Then I locked the documents in the office safe and sat back in Mom's old chair, staring at the dust dancing in the light. For the first time, grief and anger intertwined, sharp and clear. They hadn't just mocked her. They'd stolen her chance to prove herself. I whispered, voice low but steady, "Not this time. You left me the proof, Mom. I'll finish what you started." The neon sign outside flickered to life, faint but alive, as if the motel itself had been waiting for me to wake up. By midweek, the motel had come alive again, not with guests, but with unwanted attention. The first car appeared just after sunrise, a black sedan that kicked up gravel as it stopped by the office. Frank stepped out wearing aviator sunglasses and that same smug grin I'd seen at the will reading. Beside him, Aunt Ellen emerged in heels unsuited for sand, her lips pressed into a tight smile. Savannah trailed behind, holding her phone horizontally. I stood behind the counter, my hands resting on Mom's old ledger, which I'd left open just enough to remind myself why I couldn't back down. Frank pushed open the door without knocking. "Well, look who's playing innkeeper," he said, glancing around the room. "You fixing this place up or just camping out in the ruins?" Ellen waved a manicured hand toward the desk. "Grace, we need to talk. Privately. This is serious." Savannah ignored both of them and zoomed in on the sign outside through her camera lens. "My followers love family drama." "This'll hit 100,000 views easy," she murmured. I gave her a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Put the phone away, Savannah." She rolled her eyes but obeyed. Frank leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "We know you've been digging through records. That's not good, Grace. Some of those files are confidential. You don't want to mess with city property laws." My stomach turned cold. "I'm looking at what Mom left me. That's perfectly legal." Ellen stepped closer, the smell of expensive perfume clashing with the scent of dust and motor oil. "You don't understand the implications. Margaret's notes, whatever she thought she discovered, were never approved by the city. There are regulations, environmental concerns. You could get fined or even prosecuted." I almost laughed. "Funny. You sound exactly like someone who has something to lose." Her face tightened. "Watch your tone. We're trying to help you." "No," I said. "You're trying to control me." The air thickened. Frank's jaw flexed. "Grace, think carefully. You don't have the money, the lawyers, or the knowledge to manage this property. We can take it off your hands before you dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of." I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean before I find out what's really under it?" His nostrils flared. Ellen's shifted voice dripping with false patience. Margaret was confused near the end. I advised the city to decline her proposal for safety reasons. She was obsessed with that old survey, seeing treasures in every grain of dirt. Don't follow her down that path. Her words hit like a confession. "You blocked her permit," I said quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me." "You were on the council. You said you advised them. You stopped her from getting approval." Frank stepped in, cutting her off. "Enough of this. Pack your things and come back with us. We'll sell the property to a development firm that knows what they're doing. You'll get your cut clean and easy." I folded my arms. "No." Savannah snorted. "You're seriously going to die out here in a ghost motel for a fantasy? This is why Mom calls you the sentimental one." I pointed toward the door. "Get off my property." Frank slammed his palm on the counter. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said. But it's mine to make. Ellen's eyes glittered with something between rage and fear. She smoothed her blazer, whispering, "You'll regret this, Grace. People talk in this town. You can't fight what's already decided." They left in a storm of dust and revving engines. Through the window, I watched Savannah filming the cracked sign as they drove away. My hands trembled when I locked the door, but inside, a strange calm settled over me. They were scared not of me, but of what I might uncover. I opened the ledger again, tracing the red circle beside the words SR Project. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, Joe Ramirez, the retired geologist who'd been one of Mom's oldest friends. When his gravelly voice answered, I said, "Joe, it's Grace Miller. I think my mother left me something big and I need to know the truth." There was a long pause, then a quiet whistle. "Meet me in town tomorrow, kid, and bring that ledger." The next morning, the air outside shimmered with the kind of heat that made the desert feel like it was holding its breath. I parked outside Joe Ramirez's small bungalow on the edge of town. His porch sagged under the weight of wind chimes and old tools, the smell of oil and coffee mixing in the air. Joe looked older than I remembered, gray hair under a baseball cap, deep lines carved around his eyes, but when he saw me, he smiled. "Grace Miller," he said, voice like gravel. "You've got your mama's stubborn look. Sit down, tell me what you found." I laid the ledger, the survey, and the faded letter on his table. He pulled on his reading glasses, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Margaret wasn't guessing. "These are real survey markings." She was sitting on geothermal land. "Back in the 80s, we had a study out here, never went public. Council blocked the permits." He looked up at me. "You know who sat on that council, Aunt Ellen," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Figures. That woman's been tied up with developers for decades. She probably buried this to keep investors away until she could buy it herself." He flipped through the ledger again, stopping at a page marked in red ink. SER Project. She meant Sunrise Redevelopment. "It's all here. Margaret's projections, potential, well depth, heat, flow estimates." She was right. I leaned forward. "So this could still be viable?" He nodded slowly. "If the rights are intact, yeah. The land's worth millions, maybe more if the geothermal flow's stable." My breath caught. "Then why didn't she tell me?" Joe sighed. "She was fighting your aunt. The moment she filed the paperwork, Ellen blocked it, claiming environmental risk. Your mom spent years trying to clear it. When she got sick, she told me she'd leave everything to you, said you'd know what to do when the time came." His words hit hard. I'd spent years believing Mom's devotion to the motel was sentimental, even foolish. Now it all made sense, every late night, every unspoken worry. "Can we confirm the rights I asked?" Joe disappeared inside for a few minutes and returned with an old file folder. "Your mom asked me to keep a copy," he said. Inside were notarized documents showing the motel's deed had been amended 5 years before her death, transferring the geothermal exploration rights directly to me under a trust. My fingers shook as I read my own name. "She made sure they couldn't touch it," I whispered. Joe nodded. "Smart woman, but the moment they realize, you know they'll come after you hard. Developers, lawyers, your family, all of them. They already have," I said, thinking of Ellen's warning and Frank's threats. "Then you better get legal help before they spin this their way. You've got proof here, but you need to file it officially." He paused, then smiled faintly. "Your mama would be proud. You've got her grit." I left with the folder pressed tight to my chest, my mind racing. On the drive back, the horizon rippled in waves of heat, but all I could see were pieces falling into place. When I pulled into the motel lot, a dust storm was brewing over the ridge, the kind that made the air hum. I hurried inside, locking the door. On the counter, my phone buzzed 5 missed calls from Aunt Ellen. I ignored them. Instead, I opened Mom's letter again, tracing the final words. "Heat under the earth is like truth. You can bury it, but it always finds a way out." Thunder rolled in the distance, low and deep. It wasn't a storm, it was a warning. I took a photo of every document, backed them up, and slid the originals into a fireproof box. Then I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the neon sign outside. I felt fear. Yes, but also clarity. They had underestimated me just as they had underestimated her. And now, for the first time, the ground beneath us was shifting. By the time I reached the motel again, the heat had thickened into a shimmering veil. My phone rang before I could even unlock the office door. Aunt Ellen. Her tone was syrupy sweet. "Grace, darling, come into town tomorrow. Frank and I want to clear the air. There's a redevelopment firm interested in the property, and I'd hate for you to miss the opportunity." I could hear the rehearsed calm behind her voice. "They'll be at the Civic Hall at 10, she added. "Be reasonable, dear." Then she hung up before I could reply. I knew a trap when I heard one. Still, curiosity and defiance dragged me there the next morning. The Civic Hall's meeting room gleamed with fluorescent light and too much air conditioning. At one end of the long table sat Frank, Ellen, and Savannah, smiling like stage actors. Two unfamiliar men in tailored suits stood nearby, briefcases open. A banner behind them read, "Western Core Energy LLC, Building a Sustainable Future." My stomach turned. Ellen gestured towards an empty chair. "Grace, I'm glad you came. We're just discussing some exciting redevelopment plans for the Sunrise Motel area." One of the suited men shook my hand with a politician's grip. "Ms. Miller, pleasure. We're proposing a geothermal project that could revitalize the region." My pulse kicked at that word, geothermal. He smiled thinly. "We understand your mother once explored similar possibilities, though she lacked the proper resources. We'd like to take it forward with your cooperation, of course." Frank slid a document across the table. "They're offering $500,000, Grace. More than generous for that scrap of land." I studied his eyes. He looked almost hungry. "And if I say no, I asked." The other suit spoke smoothly. "Then, unfortunately, we'll proceed with municipal approval. Councilwoman Miller has already initiated the zoning transfer." Ellen's smile froze. "It's just a formality, Grace. Everyone benefits. Everyone but me," I said. Savannah lifted her phone. "Can we not make a scene? The optics are bad." I turned to the Western Core men. "Tell me something. How did you even know about the geothermal data?" One of them hesitated a fraction too long. "Public record." I pulled out my phone and showed a picture of the Ledger's red-marked survey. "Funny. This isn't public." My mother's notes were locked in her desk. "Someone leaked them." The room went quiet. Frank cleared his throat. "Grace, don't play detective. You'll just embarrass yourself." I pushed the papers back across the table. "You know what embarrasses me, watching my family try to sell my mother's legacy to the same company she fought to keep out." Ellen's voice sharpened. "Legacy doesn't pay bills. This is business." "No," I said, standing. "This is theft." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Frank rose, towering over me. "You don't have the money or the lawyers to win this. Sign the deal and walk away with dignity." I met his glare. "My mother used to tell me dignity isn't something you sell. It's something you keep when everyone else does." His jaw tightened. Savannah's camera light flicked on. She was filming again, whispering, "Perfect content." I knocked the phone from her hand. It clattered across the table, the video still recording Ellen's frozen face. "Post that I said. Show them what greed looks like." I turned and walked out, my legs trembling but steady. Outside, the sun hit me full force, blinding and pure. My phone buzzed again, voicemail from Joe Grace. "Be careful. Western Core's got friends on the council. Get those documents filed today." I looked back through the glass door. Inside, Frank was shouting, Ellen's face pale. Savannah picked up her phone and aimed it at me through the window, but I just smiled. They thought I was cornered. They still hadn't learned that Margaret Miller never left her daughter defenseless. I climbed into my car, heart hammering. Tomorrow I would make it official, the trust, the deed, the survey, all of it. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one measured in signatures, not shouting. The kind my mother would have been proud of. The next morning dawned sharp and cold, a strange chill settling over the desert. I barely slept. By sunrise, I was in my car heading toward Bisbee's County Courthouse with the folder of documents buckled in the passenger seat like a passenger. The sky glowed pale gold, and the air carried that electric stillness that always comes before a storm. I replayed Joe's voicemail again, his gravelly warning echoing in my mind. "File it before they do." The courthouse clerk, a woman named Marla, with hair the color of iron, looked up as I approached. "How can I help you, honey?" I slid the folder across the counter. "I need to register a trust amendment and submit a property rights claim, geothermal and mineral, under the Sunrise Motel parcel." She scanned the first page, eyebrows arching. "This is a big one." "You got counsel?" "Yes," I lied. She gave me a slow smile. "Good. Once it's filed, it's public record. No one can override it without your consent." The sound of her rubber stamp hitting the page was louder than thunder. When I stepped outside, sunlight flared off the courthouse steps. It was done. They couldn't erase my mother's name or mine without exposing themselves. But victory didn't taste sweet yet. Not with the voicemail waiting on my phone, a new one from Ellen. "Grace, call me back. You're making things worse for yourself. Frank's talking to lawyers. Western Core's pulling out. Do you understand what that means? You'll be left with lawsuits and unpaid fees." Her voice trembled under its fake calm. "Please don't do anything stupid." I deleted it without replying. That afternoon, Joe and I met at a small diner off Highway 80, our usual booth tucked by the window. He sipped coffee while I spread the stamped documents across the table. "You did it," he said, eyes gleaming. "You just locked the rights in your name. The council can't touch it now." "Not without breaking the law," I said. He chuckled. "Ellen's good at bending rules, not breaking them." "You've cornered her." Just then, the diner door jingled. Frank walked in his expensive shoes dusted with dirt, his expression carved from stone. Behind him were two men in suits, the same ones from Western Core. My stomach twisted. He approached our table like a wolf circling prey. "Grace," he said smoothly, still playing games. Joe leaned back. "It's not a game when it's legal." Frank's jaw flexed. "This is your last chance. You file anything else and I'll bury you in litigation until you're broke." "You can try," I said. He leaned closer. "You think a few signatures make you powerful? You're just a teacher with a broken motel and a dead woman's dreams." My hand trembled under the table, but my voice didn't. "That dead woman built more from nothing than you ever did with everything. She earned this land, and now it's mine." The suits exchanged uneasy glances. Joe's voice cut through the tension. "You might want to read the papers before you threaten her, Frank. It's all filed with the state. You mess with her now, you'll be fighting the Energy Commission too." Frank froze, the color draining from his face. "You didn't." "She did," Joe said. "And the EPA's been looking into council conflicts of interest." The words hung between us like a blade. Frank's composure cracked. "You've made a huge mistake," he hissed. He turned sharply and stormed out, the suits scrambling after him. I exhaled slowly. Joe grinned. "He's not used to losing." I stared out the window at the empty road. He's not done yet. By evening, my phone buzzed non-stop texts, calls, even emails from unknown addresses. Someone had leaked the story. Local teacher inherits motel sitting on multi-million geothermal reserve. Comments exploded online. Family Feud turns hot. Savannah's name appeared in hashtags. The internet was doing what it always did, spinning truth and spectacle into one tangled thread. But for once, I wasn't afraid of their noise. The truth had been buried long enough. Tomorrow, the world would see what my mother left behind and who had tried to steal it. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of Cochise County Courthouse. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. Reporters waited outside the wooden doors, their voices murmuring like static. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. On one side sat Frank and Ellen with their high-priced attorneys whispering furiously. On mine sat Joe and a quiet man from the Environmental Law Center who had agreed to represent me pro bono. The judge, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, adjusted her glasses. "We're here to address allegations of fraud, obstruction of permits, and violation of public trust related to the Sunrise Motel property," she said. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Ellen tried to smile, all politeness and pearls. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding, nothing more." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Then why is Western Core Energy listed as a co-complainant?" The company's lawyers squirmed. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, the documents lying on the table before me. Mom's survey the trust deed, the letter. When my turn came, I stood. Your Honor. I began, my voice trembling but clear, my mother. Margaret Miller discovered a geothermal source beneath our property in the 1980s. She filed the necessary paperwork, but the permit was denied under environmental risk, a motion introduced by her sister councilwoman, Ellen Miller. What my mother didn't know was that Ellen was working with developers to acquire that same land for Western Core Energy. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Frank's face reddened. That's absurd, he snapped. My lawyer slid a stack of printed emails across the bench. These are internal communications between Councilwoman Miller and Western Core's regional director. They discussed delaying approval until after Mrs. Margaret Miller's passing. The judge read the first few lines silently, her mouth tightening. Ellen's voice rose. Those are taken out of context. The judge looked up. Did you or did you not block the permit? Ellen hesitated. For safety reasons, and later negotiate potential sale terms for the same property. Silence. The judge nodded to the bailiff. Mark these as exhibits. Frank slammed his hand on the table. You can't prove I knew anything about this. Joe spoke up from the back. Oh, you knew. You met me in 1983, Frank. I was the geologist who ran the first test. You offered me cash to keep my mouth shut. The room erupted. The judge pounded the gavel. Order, she barked. My knees nearly gave out, but I stayed standing, watching as decades of deceit cracked open under the weight of truth. Western Core's lawyers whispered among themselves before rising. Your Honor, one said quietly in light of this revelation, our company withdraws from all agreements and disavows any intent to purchase the land. We will cooperate fully with investigators. That was the sound of victory, not triumphant, but righteous. The judge turned to Ellen and Frank. This court finds sufficient grounds to refer the matter for criminal investigation. The property and all rights shall remain in Grace Miller's possession pending full review. Ellen sagged into her chair, her pearl necklace trembling in her fingers. Frank stared at the floor, his confidence gone. The gavel came down one final time. When I stepped outside, flashes exploded from cameras. Reporters shouted questions. Grace, how does it feel to win? What will happen to your family? Will you sell the rights? I stopped at the courthouse steps. This was never about money, I said. It was about integrity. My mother believed in doing what's right even when nobody believed in her. I just followed her lead. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then applause rippled through. Joe squeezed my shoulder. She'd be proud, kid, he murmured. The late afternoon sun glared across the courthouse parking lot, and for the first time in years, I breathed without fear. The truth was out. They couldn't bury it anymore. But I knew something else too. The real reckoning had just begun. Because when people like Frank and Ellen lose power, they don't vanish quietly. Still, as I drove back toward the motel, the sky burned orange and endless. The land stretched wide and untouched, humming faintly beneath the earth like a promise finally kept. A year later, the Sunrise Motel was unrecognizable. The sagging roofs were gone, replaced with adobe-style facades that glowed gold in the sunset. The cracked sign that once flickered, "No vacancy," now blazed proudly in new letters, Sunrise Geothermal Resort and Spa. What used to be weeds and dirt behind the property had become a landscaped oasis where steam rose gently from natural pools carved into the earth. The same geothermal veins that my mother discovered now powered the entire complex, turning decay into renewal. Every morning when I walked through the lobby, the air smelled of cedar and fresh linen instead of mildew and dust. I still kept Mom's mug on the counter, the one that read "One Day at a Time." It reminded me how far those days had taken me. The lawsuit had ended with fines, restitution, and public disgrace for Frank and Ellen. The court ruled Ellen guilty of conflict of interest and barred her from holding public office again. Frank's hotels folded under tax audits, his empire shrinking faster than his temper. Savannah tried to distance herself, releasing a tearful video about healing from family trauma, but the internet has a long memory. She sent me an apology months later. I never replied. Karma had a way of handling its own paperwork. The first guests checked in 6 months after construction finished. Some were curious locals. Others were travelers from Phoenix who had heard rumors of the motel that turned into a miracle. Joe became my operations manager. He said he wanted to watch the steam rise and know Margaret was right all along. We hired local workers, many of whom had been unemployed for years. The resort didn't just bring luxury, it brought life back to the town. When the geothermal plant's revenue exceeded projections, I started a scholarship in Mom's name for students in environmental science. The day we handed out the first awards, I looked up at the mural painted on the resort's lobby wall, a portrait of Mom surrounded by warm light and desert blooms. The artist had captured her exactly strong, calm smiling, like she already knew how it would all turn out. Tourists took photos of it without knowing who she was, but the locals always paused, tipping their hats before moving on. Every evening I walked the same path she once took from the office door to the back lot. The air there was warmer rising from the earth in soft white ribbons. At night, when the guests were asleep, I'd stand by the fence and listen to the quiet hiss of geothermal vents. It wasn't just energy, it was memory living and breathing under the soil. One afternoon, the governor's office called to nominate the resort for an Environmental Innovation Award. I laughed through tears. It wasn't the money or recognition that moved me. It was validation of every sleepless night, every insult, every "you can't." They had said my mother's dreams were worthless. Now her name was printed in bronze on a plaque at the resort's entrance, in honor of Margaret Miller, who saw value where others saw dust. Sometimes guests asked if she was a scientist. I told them she was just a woman who believed in hard work and in her daughter. That answer always made them smile. By late autumn, the resort turned a profit big enough to pay every debt and fund 3 more scholarships. The numbers didn't feel real, but the warmth in my chest did. The motel that once stood as a punchline had become the heart of the town, and in every corner of it I could still feel her folding sheets humming softly, reminding me that patience and faith weren't weaknesses but the quiet engines of something eternal. When the last light faded and the steam rose silver under the moon, I whispered into the desert air, "You were right, Mom. You always were." It was exactly 2 years to the day since I'd stood on that cracked asphalt holding the keys they all laughed at. Now, as I stepped out onto the same lot, morning sunlight washed over the new pavers like spilled honey. Guests were arriving for the resort's anniversary gala: business leaders, environmental scientists, even a few journalists who had once written me off as the naive daughter with a dream. Joe waved from the geothermal pump station, his white hair glinting. "You ready for your speech, boss?" he called. I smiled. Not really, I admitted, but she would have been. Inside the lobby, everything gleamed: marble counters, desert wildflowers in glass vases, walls painted the color of sunrise. But I kept one piece exactly as it was, the original wooden counter from Mom's office varnish, worn smooth from decades of hands. People thought it was a design choice. It wasn't. It was a promise. As I adjusted the microphone, the murmur of conversation quieted. The crowd looked expectantly toward me, cameras raised. 2 years ago, I began, this place wasn't a resort. It was a ruin. My mother's last gift and my family's favorite joke. They laughed when she left me this old motel. They said it was worthless. But she saw what no one else did: possibility. A hush settled. She taught me that value isn't about what something looks like, it's about what you're willing to pour into it. Love, work, faith. Those are investments that never depreciate. My voice caught for a moment, but I steadied it. And now, thanks to her vision, this land doesn't just produce heat. It produces hope, jobs, education, renewal. Applause swelled, but I lifted a hand. Before I finish, I want to tell you something I've never said publicly. The audience leaned in. My aunt and uncle tried to sell this land to a corporation that would have gutted it. They wanted profit. My mother wanted preservation. The law sided with her, but I believe it was truth that won. Because truth, like geothermal heat, can stay buried for decades, but it always finds its way to the surface. The room went silent, the kind of silence that means people are really listening. I ended simply, "This place belongs to everyone who was ever underestimated and refused to give up. So if you ever doubt yourself, remember what my mother taught me sometimes: the things that look broken are just waiting for the right hands to heal them." When I stepped away from the microphone, people rose to their feet. Joe wiped his eyes. Reporters jotted notes. Somewhere in the crowd, I noticed Savannah standing quietly near the back. No phone in her hand, no camera. Just listening. When the applause faded, she approached hesitant. "Grace," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you for not suing me after you know." I gave a small smile. "You helped me more than you know. Your video made people look closer." She laughed weakly. "I thought I was exposing you. Turns out I was exposing them." "We've all done worse for attention," I said. "You learned. That's what matters." She bit her lip. "Mom's not doing great. She keeps saying she never meant for it to go that far." I looked past her to the horizon. "Tell her I said the same thing about forgiveness. It goes as far as you let it." Savannah's eyes shimmered, and for the first time I saw the girl she used to be before the fame and filters. She hugged me once quick and trembling, then walked away into the sunlight. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the desert was quiet again, I sat outside by the geothermal pools. Steam rose in white ribbons against the indigo sky. I opened Mom's old ledger, now preserved behind glass, and ran my fingers over her words one last time. Not all treasure shines. The moon reflected on the water, and in that reflection I saw her face not as a ghost, but as memory steady and alive. "We did it," I whispered. The wind rustled the mesquite trees warm and gentle as if answering back.